Some of us probably are thinking, and which was clear from our poll also, is as if it has something to do with developing a product, like the products that we are used to seeing, like whether it's a software product which goes out of any software company, like it could be a Microsoft Excel or it could be Microsoft Teams or something like that. Whether it is something has something to do with that, maybe or may not be, but actually product engineering is something completely different. So let's try to put a definition around it. So it is the process of using your engineering skills along with your consultative and creative skills to create a product for an end customer. And now when I say here to create a product for an end customer, that product doesn't necessarily mean the product that you are used to seeing. It could be any solution that a customer would be able to make use of. For example, if you are creating a website as well, that also is a product as long as it meets certain criteria, and let's define those criteria. You would probably be thinking right now that that's what we have always been doing. We have been doing creating solutions for our clients all of our life as part of our projects, being software engineers. So how is product engineering different? So let's try to understand the difference between software engineering and product engineering. A software engineering's focus is primarily on cost, time to market, and scope. And it focuses on just somehow producing certain deliverables. Whereas a product mindset drives the transformation from that outputs to outcomes by making use of a mindset which is completely focused on quality, speed, and value, which Chandra talked about earlier. Now, quality, speed, and value are just a different perspective of that costs, cost, time to market, and your scope itself. However, it's about how you look at them. So let's take an example that how is it different. In a project mindset, which we all are used to, when a client comes to us with a certain requirements, we are used to start developing a software which meets that requirements. We'll test it, and as long as it meets, we will deliver it to the client, and client probably would be happy as well. That's what we used to, that okay, let's try to meet the requirements that the client has asked for. That's our mindset, and he or she has given us a timeline. Let's try to meet that. But the moment you are into a product mindset, your thinking is completely different. You will not think about how to create these solutions in a technical architecture based on these requirements. Instead, you will start first putting yourself into the shoes of the customer, that why would this customer require this feature? What would that customer get out of this? Would this customer actually face a problem if I develop this feature, or this feature will be actually making the life of the customer easy? Can I do it differently? So you start thinking about this by putting yourself into the shoes of the customer. So you think first about the features, then you start thinking about that, let me think about how to architecturally create it. And while thinking about the architecture, you may figure out that maybe there is a complexity coming out, but there is if I try to do it in a different way, the same feature, the architecture will come down in terms of its complexity, but will still meet the same objective for the end user. And you may go back to the client that, hey, you gave me this requirement that it should be done in a different way, but I have a different thought. Can we do it in different way for the end customer? And you will still meet the same requirements. That way, you are completely engaged into the business requirements itself. You are not just focused on creating the deliverable, which is a software, but you are focused on creating an output which is usable by the end customer itself. And that is what is the difference between a product engineering mindset versus a software engineering or a project engineering mindset there. Now, next, Richa, we'll try to understand this from a physical world example. This is a Tesla car, which produces, the Tesla as a company produces electrical cars, and many other companies also produce electrical cars. But how are Tesla different from the other companies? When they developed the car, they thought about the ownership the experience that the people would have once they purchase the car. So they figured out that now that a person has an electrical car, they need to think about how to charge this car when it is at home. And if I have to charge it using a normal electricity, my electricity bills will go up suddenly. So instead, if I have a solar electricity available to me, I can make use of that cheap power. So they provided solar roofs, and they created those solar roofs and made it available to their customer. Not only that, they thought that, okay, my customers, when they will go to the drive, they should not be constrained by the fact that my battery can run, next slide, Richa, my battery can run only up to a certain miles, and after that, I cannot drive my car at all. So they started thinking about creating charging stations all over the country so that even the electrical car customers can drive the car for long drive by charging their car from the charging stations which are available. They did not depend on the other people to create those charging stations because they wanted to solve the problems of the people themselves. They really thought about the people's issue. Next slide, Richa. And then they figured out that if we use the typical car batteries which are available in the market, they probably will lower the performance of the car. So they took upon themselves to create the batteries also, and they created the biggest gigafactory which produces the maximum kilowatt hour in terms of battery output, and made sure that the experience of the car owner is great, that I have a complete ecosystem. Next, that if I have a car, I'm able to charge it wherever I need. I have the best battery power. I have a solar panels at home so that I have economical thing. And not only that, my car has the best computer system in it so that it is feeding all my activity back to Tesla so that they can improvise on it as well. And it gets the upgrades almost every week. And I'm always on top of the latest features. So they really thought about that. Next. But it's not just about that. As we said that apart from quality and value, speed also matters. What you deliver to the client, you should be able to deliver it very fast as well. There was a Twitter feed by one of the customer that he or she is observing that lots of the customer are parking their cars in the charging spots even after the car is fully charged, and thereby is wasting the parking spot and not giving the opportunity to others to the charge. Elon Musk was immediately acknowledged it and said that yes, we must do it. And then within like 6 weeks, 6 days, he got a response from the same public that yes, this is what is called the customer experience, because they put in place a system that no one can unnecessarily make use of the parking spots if after they have charged their car, and they will start charging the customer once the car is charged and the car is still in the charging station itself. So it's about reacting to the customer feedback very fast and putting the solution and delivering it there itself. So that's what makes you as a product engineering company, that you must listen to the customer's sentiments and give the results back. But so far that is in the physical world, but let's try to see that in the software engineering and in the Salesforce ecosystem, that how would it look like? As we talked about, we definitely need to look at, instead of scope, time, and cost, next, we need to focus on speed, quality, and value. But that mindset change takes lots of time. And at Publicis Sapient, we have been working on this mindset change for the last 3 years or so. And we have been very successful in delivering multiple solutions for the client using product engineering mindset, where our focus has been primarily on these things, value, quality, and speed, thereby making sure that the engagements are successful for the end customer. Now, how do we actually get these? Next. So I'm just going to give some examples only. For example, if we talk about speed, you need to make sure that there is automation everywhere there is possible. And we'll talk about tons of examples in the Salesforce ecosystem later, that how to bring up the automations there. But theoretically, if talking about that, let's take an example that you are testing. That should be fully automated, whether it's unit testing, whether it's functional testing, whether it's integration testing. And if you automate that, the advantage of that is not just about reducing the testing effort. It's about the fact that you would be able to deliver your feature very fast to the production environment, because you will not have to worry about that there is a regression. Because if at all there is a regression, you will be able to catch it very fast through your automation scripts and take an action, corrective action, and deliver the end product in the right way itself. So thereby you create a value for the end customer as well. Next. And then you need to have a focus on the quality, because that's the primary thing. Now, how do you really need to focus on the quality? At any point of time, you must be able to have a handle on where you stand on the quality. And that's where again automation comes into picture. Whatever KPIs you want to measure, you must be able to measure it in an automated way rather than in a manual way. And at Publicis Sapient, we have created a tool called NowHow, which was earlier called Speedy, which integrates with various systems, including, for example, the CI/CD of your Salesforce ecosystem, that the way you will do the build and releases, etc. It will integrate with those systems and get all the parameters, whether what is the gap from what quality KPIs you want versus where you are. So it will give you a visual picture, and not just on the quality, even on the speed and the value as well. It will integrate with your Jira, with your Confluence, will give you the velocity of how the team is delivering stories, etc. And you can have a complete picture. It will not allow you to fix, but it gives you the visibility, and you exactly know where the gaps are, and then you can take the corrective action. And you don't have to struggle. It gives all the things on the real time. And that's where again automation comes into picture, but automation which is completely focused on quality itself. Next. And now looking at an example from the commerce world. Those who are from the commerce world, they will understand it very well. If I look at the journey of a customer, he or she first interacts probably with a company by getting a marketing material, say an email or so. And if he or she gets excited, they will buy a product by going to the online site. And then maybe they will have some issue and they will use some service features of the company to get that serviced. Now, when I look at the Salesforce ecosystem, there are different products which are offered to solve all different needs of the customer, even though it is all related to the B2C ecosystem itself. The emails, etc., they were all supported by Marketing Cloud. Buying experience, that is supported by your Commerce Cloud. Whereas it's when it comes to serving your needs, if you need after sale service, that is done by your Service Cloud. We all know that these are all three different products which are not well integrated with each other, even though Marketing Cloud and Sales Cloud, Service Cloud is somewhat integrated, but they're not well integrated. But the customer doesn't worry about that. And that's where the product engineering mindset comes into picture. We need to think about a customer, that what kind of experience that customer should have while integrating with interacting with these three platforms, so that he or she doesn't feel as if he is having a disjointed experience completely. Now at Publicis Sapient, we have created solutions thinking ourselves that how the customer would feel while interacting with these systems, and have integrated these three systems to create certain use cases which a typical B2C commerce world would like to have it. For example, how the cart abandonment happens. For that, you need to integrate your Marketing Cloud and the Commerce Cloud itself. And you really need to think about how the customer would feel, and you need to integrate those solutions, and lots of automations need to be put there. So that's just one of the example that how you could actually put product mindset in the Salesforce, some of the Salesforce products. And now I will invite Alok, who will talk about some of the best practices that we should use or the architecture principles at a very high level while thinking about the solutions on the Salesforce ecosystem.
Thanks, Ashu. And hello, everyone. My name is Alok, and I lead the technology and architecture group here at the Core COE, Salesforce Core COE at Sapient. And I help our customers succeed with Salesforce mainly through excellence in architecture and design. So as Chandra and Ashu previously discussed, right, the business environment is becoming increasingly dynamic. And now engineering divisions have a key role to play in helping their companies succeed by supporting digital transformation at a very fast pace and with a very high quality output. So now let's look at how engineering teams can achieve these goals, right? So some of the best practices that I'll cover today, see, basically they're very low-hanging fruits that you can use in any project without really having to go through a lot of approvals or policy changes. Also, these practices are useful in a variety of settings. So they are industry agnostic. You can use them in most industries and of projects of varying sizes. Um, so when we think about speed, right? Now we know that it's very important for the engineering division to churn out high quality features at a very fast pace. But then how do I go about doing that? Now, for example, having the right set of tools can help you complete a lot of repetitive tasks that we do during engineering and development more efficiently. I mean, if you have a few dishes to wash, you can always do it by hand, right? But then when you need to do a lot of them and you need to do a lot of them every day, it makes sense to invest in a dishwasher. And then by that analogy, in the Salesforce world, you have SFDX, right? Which I feel is like a Swiss Army knife, right? Uh, but see, the power of SFDX does not lie in the fact that it can do a lot out of the box, but also that you can easily extend it to support a variety of tooling use cases that you might have. For example, at Publicis Sapient, we have built a variety of custom plugins for SFDX by extending it using Node.js that can automatically create configuration directly from business requirements. Now, to achieve this, what we have done is we have built requirement parsers so that the business analysts actually put the requirements in an Excel sheet, and then these tools can scan the requirements from the template to automatically create Salesforce metadata. For example, right now, recently we created a new tool, an SFDX extension, where business analysts can capture the security requirements in an Excel file, and then we can create the necessary permission sets, role hierarchies, and even profiles, and out of the box, OWD settings using the SFDX plugin. And this helps a lot, right? Because what the team is then focusing on is really building the complex features, and whatever can actually be translated from business can actually be done through tooling, right? Just one simple example, but it can save a lot of time. Imagine you having to create, say, 7 to 8 permission sets, where each permission set, say, has thousands and thousands of fields, right, where FLS has to be applied. This can save you tons of time. Now, apart from tooling, you can also gain acceleration by having a library of essential frameworks that you can reuse without licensing restrictions. Now, either it might be an IP that you developed in your company that you are okay to license freely to your client. But even if you do not have such a library in your organization, what you can do is you can always consider using some of the excellent frameworks that are available today in the Salesforce community, including Apex Commons, right? Now, most of the framework that you see today at Apex Commons, they are actually covered under very liberal licenses like MIT. And for example, one of my favorite frameworks, right, in Apex Commons is the unit of work pattern, which was implemented by Financial Force. And this pattern actually allows you to write highly optimized nested DML logic, which is very important if your project deals with large volume of data, has complex implementations, and you're always running short on governor limits, right? So this pattern can really help you shave off some of the inefficiencies that you might have in your code. And DevOps is another essential practice, right? And then whenever we talk about DevOps, generally people think that this might mean putting together an end-to-end touchless and automated CI/CD pipeline. But no, you need not really have all of that. You can derive benefits of DevOps even with minimal investments, and then proceed as you go along. For example, I generally recommend that you start with at least the package-based development model if you're not using that already. Which basically means that your code should always belong to a package instead of being some free-floating metadata that you just deploy out of context. Now, there are a variety of options available in Salesforce ecosystem when it comes to packaging, but the easiest one to get started with today is probably the 2GP unlock packages. So, for example, if you today want to implement a very simple DevOps process in your projects, what it could include is a very simple flow where you check in your code into a version control system, have a very simple build plan that simply validates that whatever code is checked in, can I deploy it to a fresh scratch org, and is it passing all the unit tests that I have in my code? And then you can create a 2GP package automatically if the build is successful. And once you have that build ready, you can simply distribute the build, the package URL to your stakeholders, PAs and other people who want to have a peek at the latest build using the package link, which will save you a ton of time, right? In terms of deployment of isolated metadata. When it comes to quality, so these are some of the things, right? You can do immediately with, to gain some acceleration, and there are more things we'll cover, maybe in the upcoming sessions. But when it comes to now quality, there are some very simple practices that you can that can give you rich dividends almost immediately, right? Not long term, maybe almost something that you can see in a matter of days. For example, an understanding of the common architectural problems in Salesforce will allow you to actually have an essential library of design patterns, right? Uh, and For example, let's assume that there is a common problem that you face in most projects. It could be making describe calls. Today, I think almost in any project, you might be making some described calls to understand the schema, either to basically implement field level security, or basically to determine how the UI labels, etc., will look based on what schema describe returns to you. And today it might be happening across your entire code base from multiple code blocks, multiple classes. But since that the schema metadata doesn't change, right? It is highly unlikely to change during the course of a particular transaction. What you can do is you can actually implement a very simple caching framework by using the singleton pattern. Simply implement a service that basically ensures that a describe call for a particular metadata entity is called only once, and then it is cached in the memory. You will burn a little bit of heap, but then what it does is it provides you tremendous velocity in terms of how fast your transaction executes and how much CPU time you actually end up saving, given that you have only 10 seconds of those. What I'll be doing is, just to talk about one more pattern, right? Suppose you have a lot of similar domain entities where the structure is, say, homogeneous, but the implementation is heterogeneous, right? The way they actually behave could be different. Now you could use factory pattern there, right? And we can go deep into tons of patterns that you probably would benefit from in almost every project. And we will be covering a lot of enterprise architecture, topics and design patterns in one of our upcoming in-depth session on this. So if you're interested in learning more, please do stay tuned and watch out for our next session. Now, another important aspect of quality is, secure coding. Now, even if you're not an ISV and you're not really building an App Exchange package, it's still, that doesn't mean you don't need to do secure coding, right? For example, if you are in a highly regulated industry, for example, like financial services, healthcare, security is generally of paramount importance. Now, including SAST and DAST tools in your pipeline. So the previous pipeline, my simplified pipeline, which just allowed you to build a package quickly by testing, if the tests are passing. To that, you can simply add SAST and DAST tools, so that it allows you to first of all understand what is the current maturity of your code base, right? Do you see a lot of security issues being identified? And if yes, what do you do? And generally, rather than having your developers read a lot of theory on this topic, it's best to simply show them the mirror and see, here are the issues that the SAST tool has identified. Why don't you go read about it and figure out how that problem can be solved? And there are a variety of SAST and DAST tools available for Apex, right? For example, generally most enterprises use Sonar or some version of Sonar. If you have the enterprise version of Sonar, Apex, language scanning comes out of the box, so there's no cost to it. And if your project has budget, and for example, if you're in a highly regulated industry, I recommend going for more, rigorous tools like CodeScan or Checkmarx. In fact, some of these tools like Checkmarx are even used by ISV partners to prepare their products for Salesforce security review, which is, basically, I would say the gold standard, right, when it comes to how secure your code is. But what I would say is that at the minimum, you should adopt secure coding practices that protect your code from at least the most common security attack vectors. And if you want to learn more about those, just go through, OWASP's top 10. OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project, and they actually list out some of the, most important vulnerabilities. They have a top 10 list there, and most of these tools actually scan for these vulnerabilities. These include, things like, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, SQL injection, etc., which are all, very important, security practices that everybody should be aware of. Finally, in terms of quality, as Ashu previously discussed, right, we need to shift, our thinking left when it comes to quality. And an example of that is, today, in a lot of Salesforce projects, generally what happens is that unit tests are generally written at the end of the project. There is some time kept for that, and they are written, just enough so that 75% code coverage can be attained. Uh, Actually, it is possible to improve the overall code quality if you simply shift that work upfront and say that before I write my first code line of code, I'm actually going to write all of my test cases. And then when I'm writing my code, my objective is to make sure that each of those test cases pass, right? So then it is impossible, I mean, in theory, for us to write code that doesn't meet requirements, because you're only going to check in that code once you are satisfied that all the unit tests that were previously written are actually being passed, right? So it's basically being more proactive in your coding, where the code is guaranteed to meet requirements, rather than writing code that is then tested later, only to find that there are bugs. uh, Now, apart from this, so how do you achieve all of this, right? I mean, we talked about a lot of practices which require some exposure to architecture and design, and an in-depth understanding of many of these topics. So how do we really achieve this? I think one of the ways to do that, and in Publicis Sapient we really believe strongly that we need to democratize architecture and design. And what that really means is that architecture and design should not be a novelty that is only reserved for large and complex projects. It should be something that is pervasive, that is available to any project, irrespective of its size, irrespective of the industry. And when you start thinking about it that way, the other thought that comes to the mind is, how do I get all of that bandwidth, right? For example, I have only a few people who are having the title of architect. And then the answer to that is that you have to really believe that anyone can be an architect. For example, at Publicis Sapient, we don't really reserve the ability to contribute to architecture and design by titles. Anyone, any developer, irrespective of their experience, as long as they have the inclination, as long as architecture and design excites them, can get involved and contribute as much as they want into architecture and design, right? And this is how you really solve these problems. Another thing is that you have to keep pace with the platform and the ecosystem. Now there are multiple ways to do that. For example, today you might and there is an excellent example I have for this, right? So till very recently, if you had to basically support field level security in Salesforce, you had to write tons of code. You had to do metadata describe, really go into the depth, of each and every field and object to understand what kind of security is applied to it, right? And then there were ideas that why shouldn't this be made simple? And I would often regularly go to IDE Exchange and check what is being done about this idea. And then Salesforce came with the with security clause, which means all of that code that you had to write earlier is not required right now. You can just include one statement and it solves all of your problems. So the important thing is that a problem that is unsolved today might become a solved problem tomorrow, because Salesforce, as you see, is very focused in listening to the customer, in listening to the customer community and the partner. And in every release, they are delivering ideas which are voted by people. So I'll highly recommend going to IDE Exchange, look at some of the top ideas, keep tracking them, and when something does get into product management pipeline, it will ultimately make it to pilot programs and beta features. And there my recommendation would be that don't wait for it to become mainstream. Go ahead, sign up for the pilot program, take these new features for a spin. What it does is, it first of all allows you to understand, it allows you to stay ahead of the curve. It allows you to understand how some of these features will work, how can that be used in some of the existing projects you have, or how that might potentially help you in some of the new solutions you're building. And it so that way you can evangelize these features faster in your company, so that you can make use of them faster. And if you find if you have some suggestions, you can always go back to Salesforce and provide your inputs, right? In turn helping build these features even more, make these features even more useful. And finally, I strongly suggest that with every Salesforce release, there's a tons of functionality coming. Go through the release notes. Even if you don't get time to go through the entire detailed release note, just go through the highlights, do some of the release notes related trails. That itself will give you very good understanding of what are some of the greatest features that are coming in every release, and how those could be used in your projects to solve the problems that you're having more efficiently.